Well, it's great to be here. When I accepted this, I didn't know I was following Michael Sorrell, so that's the only downside. Fortunately, my fellow panelists will have enough charisma to hopefully get us in the Michael League. And so I want to start while they're sitting. I just want to offer a few remarks that relate to this issue of student voices and the issue of affordability. And just as Michael cited the announcement at Morehouse, I'm going to cite it in a different way. So Sunday afternoon, I'm thinking foolishly that I already know what the news is going to be for Monday, and then I started to hear about this. And what was interesting to me was the dual track of discussion on social media. From financial aid experts, possibly from some of you in this room, I was seeing all these tweets about well, does it cover private loans? Does it cover plus loans? What does this mean exactly? Will this be a charitable gift? How will it work? From students, I just saw, yes, they really couldn't have cared less about any of those questions. And then I started to see references to students saying, this is amazing, I have $100,000 in debt. And then the financial aid experts got involved too, and then they were tweeting things like, wait, on College Scorecard, it says the median debt is just $26,000, so how can this be? And it was clear to me that the people tweeting that had no clue that the College Scorecard only covers certain kinds of debt, and doesn't tell you the whole picture. And you all, we've got a lot of experts in this room, you know that there are important differences between the debt that counts there, but you know what? To a Morehouse student or to any student, doesn't matter that much. They know what they owe, they know what their debt is going to be. And so that's why I'm so excited about the theme of today's event, looking at student voices and the affordability issue, and why I'm so excited that we have these great panelists. And so I'm going to first have each of them briefly introduce themselves. You have their full bios in your program materials, and please take my word for it, they are all incredibly distinguished people. So I'm going to ask them to be brief in sort of introducing themselves, and then I'm going to sit down and we're going to start a discussion. So please, let's say hello.
So, am I on here? Can you all hear me? Perfect. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Stanley Andres. I am a assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University as well as Howard University College of Medicine. My reasoning for being on this panel and the how I fit into this space is I am also a formerly incarcerated individual who has 3 felony convictions. In my early 20s, I was sitting in front of a judge facing 20 years to life in prison. That prosecuting attorney at the time felt that I had no hope for changing the decisions that I had been making up until that point in my early 20s, and thus was pushing for life in prison. Clearly, by the few words that I introduced myself with just a second ago, I would say that I probably changed a little bit from what this prosecutor was prophesizing. And so I was eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison, and I went into prison very much with the idea that I was this career criminal that I was sentenced as. And I felt hopeless. I felt as if there was really nothing left for me. I felt that all that I had was to try and become a better drug dealer, essentially. I was fortunate enough to have this mentor step into my life that saw a different trajectory for me. He saw this potential that I didn't even see in myself at the time, and he started investing in that potential. Along with this mentor stepping into my life, my father, who I had lost contact with due to making all these poor decisions that that led to me going to prison. Over the course of about 2 years, he went through probably 25 to 30 surgeries where they began by amputating his toe, then half of his foot, then his entire foot, then half of his other foot, then his entire foot, all the way to the point that he was literally half the man that I knew him to be. And sitting in my prison cell, it was this emotionally devastating roller coaster of hearing from family and expecting the inevitable. And eventually my father lost his battle with type 2 diabetes before I had the chance to reconnect with him. Through these agonizing emotional times, it was also this inspirational period where I knew about type 2 diabetes, but didn't understand how it could take someone to that who was relatively healthy to where he was. So I began becoming interested in diabetes. I read my first scientific article sitting in my prison cell, and if anyone is familiar with scientific articles, they know that every other word is a different language. And dictionaries in prison are useless to that. So this mentor would put money on my books and spend hours going through these articles with me, to the point that he wasn't even, endocrinology was not his specialty, but he took the time to learn about it just so he can help teach me about it. When it was time for me to come home, I was of the belief he had planted this idea that I could continue my education. And I was very excited about continuing my education. I put together, with the help of him and some others that were helping support this effort, I put together a number of applications that took months to put together, because on the inside there's intricacies that I won't really go into. But it took months to put these together, and almost immediately, rejection after rejection after rejection. I got rejected from every single place except for St. Louis University, where this mentor was on the admissions committee. So this mentor helped facilitate this second chance, and St. Louis University offered this second chance. I got into the St. Louis University program. I completed my PhD and MBA at the top of my class in 4 years, as opposed to 7 years, who most individuals take about 7 years. And you know, I mentioned that a lot because it wasn't about that I had this high level of intelligence. It was more so this drive, this hunger and thirst for change, of being this different person. And so I eventually moved on to Johns Hopkins. I eventually moved on to Howard. And I eventually started an organization called From Prison Cells to PhD that runs a program called Prison to Professionals, where we help currently and formerly incarcerated individuals pursue higher education. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'll leave it there.
So that's a hard story to top, but we shouldn't try to top it. We should actually honor it. So good, amazing story. But let's continue down the panel. If we could just briefly introduce yourselves so we can get to the discussion.
Sure, I'm Will Del Pilar, and I'm the Vice President for Higher Ed at the Education Trust here in Washington, D.C. And I'll just say briefly, I do this work because I am the student that I advocate for. I'm a first-generation low-income Latino from L.A. who went to a poorly funded K-12, was advised by a counselor not to go to college, didn't go to college, found my way on my own. And so, I tell people that I wasn't given the opportunity to thrive in my educational setting. I was forced to survive my educational setting. And so I do policy work because I believe we should be creating context that allows students to thrive and not survive within educational settings.
All right, I certainly can't top anyone's story. My name is Zakiya Smith-Ellis. I'm the Secretary of Higher Education for the state of New Jersey. I previously worked at Lumina Foundation, where I met many of you in the audience, so it's good to be back around a set of friends. Before that, I was in the Obama administration at the White House and at the Department of Education. I do this work because I don't have a particularly compelling personal story. I went to college. It was pretty straightforward, graduated in 4 years, went and got a master's, got a PhD. I didn't get a PhD. I did the program Michael Sorrell did, where he's gone now. Got an EDD, so I bow to those of you who have the real doctorates. And I'm here now.
That's a real doctorate.
Okay. I'm here now to just share a little bit about this work. But I just will say I grew up outside of Atlanta, and a lot of my classmates did not go to college. I remember Georgia State before it was Georgia State, and they none of my classmates that went to Georgia State graduated on time. So I can see the reforms firsthand. And the reason what motivates me to do a lot of this work is because I don't feel like I'm any more smart or brilliant than any of those other students, but I just had parents, I had a support system, and I try to be humble enough to realize that I'm not as brilliant as sometimes people make you out to be. It's just that you had a set of support. So I want to make sure every person has that set of supports, because we are wasting an enormous amount of potential in this country by not setting people up for success.
Well, and I have to share one important fact
Oh,
about
yes.
Zakiya, which is now she's quoted all over the place. I quoted her when she was an undergraduate. So before the New York Times
It was my
quoting
first
her,
quote
I
ever
was
in
quoting
a,
her.
well,
So,
other than the Vanderbilt Hustler,
yeah,
you were my
so
first quote.
I'm very proud of that fact.
My grandmother reminded me of that. She said, I read Inside Higher Ed, and you were over in London, and you were talking to these stupid reporters instead of covering your head, because they were bombing in London at the time that I was talking to Scott.
But yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Jose Luis Cruz. I am the president of Lehman College of the City University of New York in the Bronx. I am an engineer by training from Puerto Rico. Before coming to New York City and being a part of the City University of New York, I had the opportunity to be a faculty member, a dean, a department chair, eventually moving out of Puerto Rico to come to DC, to the Education Trust, where I served as the VP of Higher Ed Policy and Practice. Made my way over to Orange County, California, to be provost of Cal State Fullerton, and now at New York. I do the work because I deeply believe that it is higher education, and education in general is the civil rights issue of our generation. I have benefited enormously from it, and now have the great joy of seeing how the multi-generational impact of higher ed plays out, with having 3 of my kids graduating college in the last 2 years. So they had it much easier than I did, and that's why we need to do the work.
So I have to start, I have this amazing view, not just of my wonderful panel, but of the Capitol there in the distance that you all can see. And, and from here, it looks magnificent and powerful. Even if what we read about on a daily basis is rancor and dysfunction. And so as we're thinking about policy and affordability, I'm just curious, and the issues of, student aid, access, loans, debt, access for prisoners, all of these issues, should we be looking at the Capitol or just sort of ignoring it and hoping that states and individual colleges do the right thing?
So I think, we must ignore it in practice, because we have to get the job done for our students. But in doing that, we need to figure out ways to elevate and inform and educate the policymakers so that they do their part. I mentioned earlier that I had it easy compared to my students and the students that we serve currently and are part of this conversation. I had subsidized housing, I had food stamps, I was a father at 19, and yet with the Pell Grant, I was able to not only pay tuition and fees, but have some money left over to pay for my books and pay for my rent and my food and my childcare and you name it. And graduate with very little debt. And so how do we go about trying to create the conditions for the students we're serving today is important. And then how do we make sure that people understand, the policymakers, that it's not like it was 30 or 40 years ago, that you can't say, oh, they just need to work harder and be more motivated.
I agree. I think that institutions and states have a role to play, and Zakiya, I think, has done a wonderful job instituting free college, a tiered free college program in New Jersey. But I think that we can't ignore the role of the federal government in creating affordable pathways for low-income students and students of color. We know that the Pell Grant is at its lowest purchasing value in 40 years. And so, at EdTrust, we're pushing for a double of the Pell Grant. We think that if we're going to really impact affordability for low-income students and students of color, we need to significantly invest more in Pell Grant. So the federal government has a role to play in ensuring that there are affordable pathways for those who struggle to pay.
I would echo what Will's saying. We can't do the work alone. So in a state, you don't have the option to not do anything and just say, oh, this is really tough. We wish the federal government was partnering with us and matching our dollars. And, at an institution, I really wish the Pell Grant was more, so I'm not going to do anything, or wherever you are. So we all do what we can. But if we really, really want to make progress, specifically in this room, and for those of us who have the ability to do advocacy, we have to pay attention to what's going on, and we have to advocate for a better partnership between the federal government, states, and and institutions. And I think there's some interesting work that I hope we'll get into around Second Chance Pell, which has started under the Obama administration and thankfully is continuing, but we're not doing enough. We have no federal-state partnership. So just even if you are the most like callous, disinterested federal policymaker, the fact that you are allowing your Pell Grant dollars to go unmatched and it doesn't have to be Pell Grant dollars, but the federal investment is in no way leveraging other investments of institutions or states at all. And I just don't understand why you would want that to be the case, because you can't actually make any progress moving forward if tuitions keep rising, which is really a function of state investment and institutional choices in some way.
So Stanley, drawing on what Zakiya said about Second Chance Pell, and just yesterday there was some encouraging news with Secretary DeVos seeking to expand that. Do you see, though, are you hopeful that Congress would actually lift the ban? Because, experiments are nice, but some would say we've actually done the research and we know what the solution should be.
Right. And if I could just do a quick experiment here really quickly on incarcerated individuals. So currently and formerly incarcerated, it's only going to take a second. And I'm only going to use this part of the room right here. So you 3 tables of folks, or maybe 4 tables, if you can just rapid fire tell me the first word that comes to your mind when you think of a currently or formerly incarcerated person. I'm going to start right here with you. I'll repeat them so if people don't hear. Potential. Dangerous. Limited opportunities. We got to go fast. Faster. What was that? Lack of choices. Loss of rights. Strength. Misfortune. Rehabilitated. Untapped potential. Not rehabilitated. Here in the back. Okay, we'll skip. Danger of recidivism. We'll go up to here. Why? Tainted. Randomness. Okay. So those were, I've done this experiment before, and roughly about 70% of the responses, if they're truly like first thought responses, are generally negative thoughts or negative words. So that is kind of what our organization does. One of the first things that we do is we seek to help increase access to education for currently and formerly incarcerated individuals by advocacy, policy change, and direct services. But one of the things that we do in all of those is helping change the narrative. We actually just put out a video, promotional video to help change that narrative. But, to move back to the question, so I think that's one of the first things that needs to be done is helping to change the narrative around what it is to be currently or formerly incarcerated person, and to use proper language, people-centered language, and move away from inmate, offender, prisoner, ex-con, things of that nature. We call the people in our program scholars. So we are on the horizon of some really positive policies that are being put forth. So the ban of the Pell Grants, eligibility for people who are incarcerated. There's a bill that was recently put forth by Senator Schatz from Hawaii. It's called the REAL Act. So it's looking to move past just this second chance Pell sites that was put into place in the Obama administration. And essentially, to give a very brief history, most of you are probably familiar, but in 1994, Pell Grants were removed from universities from being able to be utilized for people who are incarcerated. This resulted in several hundred colleges who were offering programs inside prisons to literally going down to a dozen or so. So thousands of people who were incarcerated were impacted overnight. Colleges were out. And it's been gone for about 20 plus years now. The Second Chance Pell site has shown promise. So, the secretary has shown interest. That's one of the things that a group called Unlock Higher Ed. So I see some familiar faces that are probably, that may have heard of this, but Unlock Higher Ed is a coalition of nonprofits across the country and organizations and individuals who are seeking to help increase access to currently and formerly incarcerated people in terms of education. And I can talk more about some of the other bills that are in place that we're working on, but to answer that question particularly about Pell Grants, so this bill was introduced last year. It didn't go very far last year. It only had, so we didn't have Republican co-sponsor. This year, we have a Republican co-sponsor, and we've spoken to a number of different offices. A lot of them were enthusiastic about this. The thing about criminal justice, as we know, as we're on the heels of the First Step Act, a lot of the bills that I'll talk about are considered to be the Second Step Act, but we're on the heels of the First Step Act, where it was this agreement on both sides that we need to do something. So now we have some other Republican offices that may be interested, and I can definitely talk more about that. But to answer your question, we are very hopeful that maybe this year, this could be the year, given that we now have some support from both sides.
So I want to move beyond just the Pell for formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated. And, you know, when we have affordability is sort of the headline for this panel and relates to the entire program. And these days, affordability, to a lot of people, they go from affordability to free college. And we are fortunate on this panel to have a distinguished New Yorker and a distinguished adopted New Jerseyan. New York has pioneered Governor Cuomo's Excelsior, which offers free tuition to SUNY and CUNY 2-year and 4-year institutions, and was sort of a big, bold push, sort of shocking to many people how much he got through at once. New Jersey seems to be taking more of a, and we'll see if Zakiya may disagree, but seems to be taking a slow and steady approach rather than trying to change the world overnight. Interestingly, I'm hearing some people who think that's the smarter way to go. But I wonder if each of you could talk about your state's approach to free college and how it's going. We'll start with.
So I'll start. I mean, so I would make a distinction between, there's a bunch of different things called free college, as you all know here. This is the room of wonks. So you all know that there are a variety of different things called free college. What I would just point out is, to Scott's point, students hear that, and it's very promising because the alternative message that we give them, to students, is fill out the FAFSA and hope it's enough. And oftentimes it's not enough, and they hear that from their students and families. So Lumina, and I would continue to be a big advocate for this today, is being clear with students about what we mean when we say affordability, because it's become meaningless. I think every president since Abraham Lincoln has talked about college affordability, literally. And so it has become so much so that it's meaningless unless you attach a real kind of dollar value to it, and free is a real dollar value. So I think in as much as we kind of dislike some of these programs because of their features, which is fine, we need to be proposing alternatives that mean something to students and families in a real tangible way. So our free community college program is tuition and fee-free community college, and we're very clear it's tuition free. We know that there are a lot of other things I could talk about. We're doing SNAP for community college students. We're talking about non-tuition costs and our affordability models more broadly. But for the tuition and fees, that part is free for people who make under $45,000 a year. And so it is a targeted within free. Now, $45,000 a year in New Jersey is not a lot. The median family income is upwards of $70,000. And so it's an expensive place to live. So the number one thing we get is like, that's nothing. Those people aren't already going for free. And it's like, unfortunately not. So that's what we're doing. We think I would just argue that I do think it is transformative in what we're doing. So the governor wanted to make community college tuition free for everyone, and what we had enough money to do was to make it tuition free for people under $45,000. For some students in the first year, because we got a pilot, we didn't get as much money as you want. This is incrementalism, it's legislative negotiating, but the vision is tuition free community college. We implemented it with $45,000 and under. I'm very hopeful that, and I saw one of our community, I just have to shout out because we have a community college friend here from Raritan Valley Community College that has a second chance Pell program.
And so, wait, if I can just ask.
I'm trying to get all of my stuff in there, like, yes.
One follow-up. So, assuming, you know, that they find oil in New Jersey and you get a lot of money
Our tax
next year,
receipts are better this year
Yes.
than you thought.
how high would you like to see it
Oh, God.
go?
Well,
Versus at what point
Well,
does it
I will just
maybe
say
not?
that the original vision from the governor was, I mean, when he campaigned and we talked about this, he talked about community college being the new frontier. We are literally telling people that they need to have some kind of post-secondary education in order for them to make it in America. And this is where I would say, you know, if we are really telling people that you have to have a college degree of some sort in order to like pay for yourself and just to live and to have a family sustaining wage, and that this is the bare minimum, I think there's a moral question about why we would charge for that at all. So I understand, like, in limited, you know, when you have limited resources, or his belief, and therefore my belief, is that community college should be tuition free for everyone because it is something that is kind of like a moral right. And we don't talk, he talks about it in the same way. A generation ago, we made high schools free. We used to charge for them and give like scholarships to special needy kids that could get in. And we're just talking about moving that up to say community college. And I really think the distinction here between community college and everyone else is important to make. And even if, so 70% of those students are already going for free in New Jersey, but we just had a roundtable. We've been going around the state talking to students, so I love this. There was a student who probably would have gone tuition free already. There are many students like this, but they didn't know. Because what do we tell them? Well, we don't say it's tuition free. We say, fill out the FAFSA. It really helps. You know, and like, and that you still have to fill out the FAFSA, but we don't say fill out the FAFSA and it'll be free. That's a big difference in our message. I would just say, everybody right now, figure out who community college is already tuition free for and just tell them. Just tell them. I really don't understand. Why don't we want to tell people that I like, this is the part that I can't understand. Even if the program costed us $0, we should do it anyway, because you're going around founding students who said, oh, there was an adult student, a woman who was like, yeah, I've always wanted to go back to school. I never knew that I could get my tuition covered. I saw a flyer, and we didn't even have a lot of money for marketing. Like, I've got team members over there. We like paid somebody a little bit to put something online, but people were getting the message and said, I thought it was too good to be true. I filled it out, and then my bill was paid. So this is like, the messaging is transformative to people, and that's why we're doing it, even if we have to start here. If we were able to say, we didn't have the income cap, because the hard thing is I make $46,000 a year. My parents are teachers. They don't have any money. What are you doing for me? And that's heartbreaking. So we wish we didn't have an income cap at all. But if we had to go with having some other kind of weird thing, it's not just full-time students. So if we had to like limit it in some way, we would rather income limit it than, you know, add some ridiculous thing like a drug test, or I don't know, you know, just some of this GPA, that kind of stuff.
So shifting to New York, and it's important to note that in New York, it's not just community colleges, but four-year publics. And it's also important to note New York has a much higher income threshold. New York City and its immediate suburbs are, like New Jersey, very expensive to live in. Not all of New York State is. And while the CUNY institutions, like the one we have represented here, do not serve a lot of wealthy families, some SUNYs do. So how does it look to you from...
Sure. So the Excelsior program is a last dollar program. So it's tuition free, but basically the way it works is it will first deduct how much you're getting from Pell, and then how much you're getting from an existing long-standing program in New York called the Tuition Assistance Program, TAP, and then whatever's left over between what you're already getting and also private scholarships and the tuition and fees bill, the Excelsior program will come in. And it's really come to fill a niche within the portfolio of financial aid. It's really targeting middle-class students, particularly.
And that's how they marketed it.
I'm sorry?
They marketed it for middle
As
class.
middle-class students. Now, the real issue, and when you were talking earlier about how do we need to get policymakers better connected with the reality in the ground, is that when people talk about free college or tuition-free, for schools like CUNY and many schools across the country that serve state, regional colleges and universities, regional colleges and universities, it's not the tuition and fees that's really breaking our students. Mm-hmm. It's the room and board and transportation. And so how do we take care of the total cost of attendance for our students so that they can be successful? One of the biggest stories out of CUNY in terms of how we've been able to help students to graduate on time with high graduation rates is the ASAP program. And basically the ASAP program, if you were to look at what is it that program really helps students out with, the one factor that seems to make the biggest difference is a free Metro card. So you can get to and from school. It's about $200 a month or something. So how do we start focusing in on that sooner rather than later? I think it's really the focus for these types of institutions.
So, Will, you talked about wanting to double the Pell Grant. And, you know, a lot of people, my guess is nobody in this room would object to doubling the Pell Grant. But is it harder to get people interested in policy changes like that when free has sort of captured the oxygen in the room?
Well, I think, like Jose Luis just said, like, free college is not really free college. It's free tuition, right? And so you still have all of these other costs associated with going to college that students are on the hook for once they go to these programs. Additionally, the design matters so much of these programs. So, you know, last dollar programs don't benefit overwhelmingly poor students because they're covered by the Pell Grant. And so those dollars are going to middle and upper income students, and they're not going to low income students. So if we want to cover costs beyond tuition and fees, we need to increase the Pell Grant in order to be able to do that. You know, design, like I said, matters. When you create these type of scholarship program like Excelsior that has limitation, it has a limitation in terms of the number of credits you have to be enrolled in, that hurts students who have to work part-time. When you create programs that have a GPA requirement, you're taking students out, you're weeding students out of those type of programs. And so we think that the best way to really make college affordable for students is invest more in the federal Pell Grant in order to cut students' costs and let those dollars be applied towards costs that are beyond tuition only.
Do you worry at all in the first budget of the Obama administration, they got through a nice, healthy increase in Pell. And then if memory serves, and Zakia may have seen some of this closer up than I, they felt that the big beneficiaries were for-profits. Do you worry that with a big Pell increase, if not accompanied by other changes, you may not benefit those you are most concerned about?
Well, I think in a comprehensive reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act, we would address some forms of we need to maintain and strengthen accountability. And so we cannot create pathways, and that includes in Second Chance Pell. We have to ensure that there are quality guardrails in place so that the institutions that are receiving federal dollars are held to some sort of standard. And so I would say that we need to ensure that there's some form of accountability that looks at institutional mission and considers a type of institution that students are not only enrolling but graduating. And so I think that it's an important factor for us to consider is what does equity-focused accountability look like? And how do we do that in a thoughtful and meaningful way to ensure that students aren't being taken advantage of, and that could be students who are impacted by the criminal justice system or a student who's enrolling at a local institution because most students go to college within 40 miles of their home.
So, Zakia, I want to just return to New Jersey for a minute because not only Excelsior, but some of the other state programs have minimum credit per semester requirements. That was controversial in New York State. What's New Jersey's approach on that?
So our tuition-free program, which I will say I think is the best program, is does not. It has a 6 credit. You have to be at least half-time, but
Okay.
that allows students who are not going full-time to also attend, which we thought was really important. It allows independent students, so it is basically like an adult promise and a promise program rolled into one. Except we don't call it either. We call it an opportunity grant, and so adult students can benefit just like students coming straight from high school. And I will say that message with those kinds of protections helps. But can I just, on Pell, what happened
Sure.
when I was there, and there's some other folks in the room who I think lived through this as well, it wasn't just the accountability piece, but also just the cost of offering a quasi-entitlement kind of ballooned, and so then we had to kind of dial back because there wasn't the political will to go even further, and into making it a real entitlement and a mandatory program, and I don't know if that's kind of back on the table. But the other thing that happened, and I don't know if this is talked about as publicly, but so just back to 2000, what year was it? Like 2010, the government almost shut down. This was when John Boehner was speaker, and there was a real fight over what to do coming out of the recession, and there was a real fight over deficit spending and all of this stuff, and it was very, 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 very contentious. And Joe Biden went in, and it was like a kumbaya moment, or not really kumbaya. And out of that, they still increased Pell. Having said that, but all of this political capital went into there. Like President Obama personally was pleading for Pell, and low-income students at community colleges, I think their net price maybe went down a little bit, but in general, it didn't, I mean, literally, President Obama was like, I did all this stuff, and students basically are paying the same amount. And so I want to, as a politician, as somebody that works in this stuff, and not politicians sound so bad, but as somebody who is spending a lot of time, we spent, like, the Pell Grant program was $15 billion, and at its height, we were spending like $38 billion within the course of 3 years. That's a huge increase. It dwarfed the size of Title I. That was a huge increase, and what we got out of it, because tuitions rose, was like very little. And so it could have been worse if we didn't, maybe it's not a cause and effect, but this is why I'm such a big proponent of having a federal-state partnership, because you did that and we didn't get any measurable difference for students in terms of their bottom line. For them, I bet you ask a student over the past 4 years, do you really feel like the federal government helped make your college more affordable in those 4 years that you were there as a low-income student? And they'll be like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. I still talk to people who are policy experts who think we cut Pell because there were things that were cut out, but like, no, we spent $30 billion more on the program in that time period. And so we need to have a program that's not just a standalone, and it's very good for what it does, but that really allows for us to have a collective impact that makes a meaningful difference in terms of a tangible benefit to students and families.
So just to put Zakiya on the spot, if Mitch McConnell just happened to drop by and say,
I have a lot of other words for him first.
yeah, you'd have another, and said, okay, I hear you're talking about we need a state-federal partnership.
Yes.
What should that look like? Your friends will get it through the House, but you tell me what to do. What would you tell?
I did this
him?
in front of Elizabeth Warren
Yes.
and the Senate committee. So we need, you need to be partnering with whoever the governor designates in a state. The state puts up money, the federal government will match it to some amount. You could do one, I don't really care what you match it at this point, but 1-to-1 sounds great, right? In exchange for that match, the state has to do certain things, including make college tuition free for some number of low-income students, but it needs to be a clear commitment that they would make to students on behalf of that. And it can be done, because you can't say that we don't have enough money to fund colleges and universities, and therefore we have to increase tuition, and not be able to say what is the amount of money by which you wouldn't increase tuition. So there has to be some number, come up with the number, we match it at the federal level, and boom, you have a real, for the first time, I would really say, since probably Pell was instituted, you would have a real meaningful, tangible commitment that people could take home to their constituents and say, this is something that we're doing for college affordability.
And Jose Luis, how does this look from your perspective? Because now you have this Excelsior program minus a federal-state partnership. What would you like to see happen?
Well, to Zakiya's point, a true partnership whereby we would commit to certain maintenance of effort and certain accountability standards in exchange for the level of funding that we need to better serve the traditionally underserved students that we have on campus. Lehman College has 15,000 students, undergrad and grad. We have 13,000 additional students in workforce development programs. 70% are female. The median age is 25. 41% of them speak a language other than English at home. The median household income is less than $30,000. And we're in one of the poorest boroughs or counties in the country. And so in order for us to really be able to scale up significantly the good work that we have already done, and we have President Fernandez here, who was the president of Lehman College for 26 years, Lehman is number 3 in the country for propelling large numbers of low-income students to the middle class and beyond. So we're good at that. But in order to scale it up, we need that sort of partnership, because the students we serve today are nothing like what the policies that are coming out of the Republican side of the aisle in particular look like.
So I want to let you all ask questions. We have mics, and if you can introduce yourselves. I'm happy to go on asking questions, but want to give you the shot. Do I see any? I'm still waiting for Mitch McConnell to arrive, but yeah, okay.
He's on the way?
He's on the way.
Okay,
Okay,
let me get
okay.
my pen ready.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Carrie Warwick from the National College Access Network. Hello, Zakiya. Zakiya, you were talking about the federal-state partnership, and one of the criticisms I feel like I've heard a lot is many of the proposals will punish the states that have already invested a lot and reward states that have really cut back. How do you think we should address that?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are ways to kind of design around this. Let me give you the short hard answer, which is something that President Sorrell just said, which is all of these things are difficult. So this is not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy, it actually, if going to the state level, I realize actually how easy it is for the federal government to spend money, and it makes me upset. Because you can have deficit spending, so all of the fights that we get over, when you can go, it just is, oh my God. Having said that, though, it's not an easy thing to do, and I think there will be trade-offs. Not I think, there will be trade-offs. So the question is, do you want to encourage people to spend something that haven't? And this is the same thing that they've dealt with Medicaid expansion, right? If a state doesn't want to play, if a state says, I don't want to be part of your silly college affordability thing, do you then punish the students in that state by not letting them into the program? And that's a really difficult design question that I think this is why we get paid the big bucks to make. And I think if you really want it to work, you just have to put up enough money to make it meaningful for people to buy in.
Can I kind of jump in? Because I think one of the concerns is that you have to have some type of a minimum level of investment from states. And so there are states currently that don't invest hardly anything in higher education, like Vermont comes to mind, New Hampshire, where they do very little in terms of state investment. So you create some minimum level of participation. But the concern is if you do that, that states, and we saw this with the College Access Challenge Grant,
Yeah.
right? They created a maintenance of effort that required a minimum level of spending, and you had to have at least your 2004 level of spending. Well, some states cut their higher ed investment
Just right to that.
to just write $10 within that amount to be able to get the College Access Challenge Grant dollars and to be able to get the spending that was, the investment that was happening at the state level. And so there is a concern there that some states would then, if you had a minimum level, cut back to that. So you have to do, I think, some formula funding to be able, or some formula to be able to get to what the right state level investment is to make college affordable for, especially for low income students.
Did you want to add some?
Yeah, I wanted to add just a few numbers that addresses kind of all of the questions. So as we think about college affordability and affordability for low-income students, particularly people of color, I really want to throw out the statistics of the people that we're really talking about are people who have been impacted by the system. So if you're only looking at it from the perspective of how can I help low-income folks and not really understanding that the majority of the people that you're talking about are people who have had legal system involvement. So out of the 2.2 million people who are incarcerated in the U.S., who has the largest rate of incarceration, as most of us probably know, 70% are people of color. 1 in 3 black males will end up in the criminal justice system. So when I talk to high school kids, it's very saddening to see that you can literally look into the crowd and say, 1, 2, 3, you're going to go to prison. 1, 2, 3, you're going to go to prison. 1 in 3 black males go to prison. This is at a rate about 7 times higher than white counterparts. So what does that mean, right? So what that means is another very dismal statistic is that 66% of people with some form of legal system involvement with the conviction on their record, 66% of people, when they see the question on an application asking about criminal history, they don't end up completing the application. So we're missing out of these individuals, as we do all of these efforts to help increase affordability and make college free, they're not even going to apply because the question is there, and it brings about this visceral fear of this place doesn't want me. So we can make it affordable all we want, but there's 66% of talent that we're missing out because we don't understand this thing that we have going on in our country of mass incarceration. Another statistic that I want to point out is that depending on how you calculate it, anywhere from 60 to 70% of people that step out of prison, whether you're calculating it to be 3 or 5 year, whether state or federal, 60 to 70% people that step out will eventually step back into prison. So the recidivism rate floats. It varies. You'll see various different rates, right? I'll just say it's high, right? If that person steps foot on a college campus, they don't even get a college degree. They just go to college, get some college, it drops it down into the teens. If that person gets an associate's degree, it drops it down to 15%. If that person gets a bachelor's degree, it drops it down to 5%. If that person gets a master's degree or higher, it essentially eliminates the possibility of that person going back to prison. This, if we view it in this way, this is public safety, right? People are not, this is reducing the rate of people going back, reducing the rate of people recommitting crimes. The other stat that I wanted to throw out is that thinking about these types of questions as incarceration being tangled into them, the cost that it is to incarcerate someone for 1 year is 5 times more costly than it is to send that person to a 4-year college for 1 year. We need to be seeing this as an opportunity to invest in the individuals that we're talking about are people who are involved in the legal system. So, you know, there are some of the key bills that I mentioned aside from the Pell Grant. There's efforts, you know, again, so Unlock Higher Ed is working at the state and federal level to ban the box. The Department of Education during the Obama administration came out with a publication called Beyond the Box that gave some information on how to handle legal system involvement. So there's state and federal efforts. There's a bill called Beyond the Box. It's Senate 3435. Another bill that is part of this kind of second step is to remove the question 23 from the FAFSA. So this is a question, again, that a large number of people who have drug convictions, they are ineligible. So we can make all these efforts, and the first thing that you say that you have to tell people is go fill out the FAFSA. Well, I can't fill out the FAFSA. What do I do now, right? And that's a large percent of people. So if we are not looking at this in that manner, we're missing, we're doing all the work and we're missing a large population of the people that we're intending to help.
Well, and it may also be worth thinking about that there are other groups, Dreamers would be the most obvious, but I don't think they're the only ones, who are not feeling safe and secure to apply these days. So that same idea of it's one thing to say we're welcome, another.
So I will just say 2 things about this. We just, if he hasn't signed it yet, I'm looking at Dylan, no, he hasn't signed it yet, but we did, in the governor's budget, he proposed making incarcerated individuals eligible for state financial aid, so even if Second Chance Pell goes away. So that's something that we have in the works that I imagine will go through with flying colors. And the other piece is Dreamers. We have financial aid available, state financial aid available for Dreamers, and they've been able to get in-state tuition for some time. So things like this, I mean, come to New Jersey sometime, anyone. It feels like a little utopia that we have going on over there. In some ways, in other ways, but it's beautiful this time of year. But those kinds of things happening in one place, it just makes me really sad when I realize that that's not the case everywhere. And we can't do it alone. We can't be the only ones, like, you know, doing this thing here and that thing there, and I feel great and it rocks. But we really do need that federal and state commitment and the partnership to have this not just be something that if you happen to live in the right state that you get these benefits. It needs to be something that is really the case no matter where you are.
So I think maybe we
Can I say real quick,
sure.
this is where states need to act. Like, states can pass in-state resident tuition for undocumented students and
Right
should
now.
do that. 2, they should allow, especially if they have a free college program, for undocumented students to participate. Only 5 states currently allow undocumented students to take advantage of free college programs, and so I think that that's easily something that can be addressed at a state level and create pathways to access for those students. It's on there, so I'm gonna push you to EdTrust website. Satra Taylor, I don't know if she's here, Satra. And I wrote a piece on this where we analyze all the statewide free college programs.
So if we have somebody who can ask a speedy question, do we have another question? Anybody? You want to know more about New Jersey vacations? All kinds of possibilities. So in that case, I think what I want to do here is, one, I want to tell you that there is not a free magic bullet here, but I brought you free swag. So I brought you a new version of the Inside Higher Ed Poetry Magnet with higher ed words, including words we have used such as access, data-driven, accountability, and mobility. So limited supply, best souvenir of your trip here. Come and get it. The other thing is to please join me in thanking these very important policymakers who are really giving their all to promote the ideas we're talking about here today.